Okay. My name's Eitan Jankelewitz. I'm a tech lawyer. I work for a law firm called Sheridan's. I've been getting involved with Bitcoin for the last year or so. I've written some articles on CoinDesk and whatnot. And we are the first law firm in the UK to accept Bitcoin, at least we think we are. We've given this a regulatory sort of breakdown previously. I know this is a more high-level thing. I'll give the very quick background. I don't think that Bitcoin is itself capable of regulation, but I do think that the entry points to Bitcoin are capable. So if you take the analogy of BitTorrent, they regulate the ISPs. I think the same is likely to happen, and in fact it is happening with Bitcoin, where you see regulation at the exchange level. The biggest news since we last did this a few months ago was probably the New York hearings. And then they were talking quite openly about a specific regulation for Bitcoin use and the way it can be used in a way which is protective of consumers and make sure that money laundering isn't enabled or taxes able to be charged and all that kind of thing. The guys down here are going to talk about some of the more detailed stuff around the rest of the world. I'm going to focus on the UK aspect. Since the last update, not a lot has happened in the UK. We are still, I think, behind the rest of the world, or a lot of other jurisdictions, certainly the US. The FCA has left Bitcoin almost completely unacknowledged. There's no real sign of any information that's helpful coming out of the FCA. They say they're not responsible for it, and I don't know who else would be. I expect eventually they'll have to do something. The most active regulator, although it's kind of more behind the scenes, is probably HMRC. There was an announcement about tax a few months ago, and it came up in the last talk we did. And that was a statement which said that VAT would be charged on the value of Bitcoins themselves when they are bought from an exchange. So basically, if you're operating an exchange, you need to charge an extra 20% more than the value of the Bitcoins in order to cover the VAT liability. So me and some other people, we were invited to go to HMRC. We spoke to them, we explained about Bitcoin. I thought they were very receptive. They seemed to be not too in the picture at the beginning of the meeting, but hopefully by the end of it they were more understanding of it as a technology and as a thing people use, a currency or whatever. After that, they withdrew the guidance which stated that VAT is chargeable on the Bitcoin itself, but they did say informally that it would be charged on the commission that exchanges charge for their services. So in a normal bureau, you wouldn't have VAT on that service charge, but considering where we were previously, it was a pretty good result to get to at least an acknowledgement that the previous guidance was wrong. The previous guidance stated that Bitcoin was a single-use voucher, which, just on a factual analysis, is not correct. There have since been rumors that HMRC would be classifying Bitcoin as a private currency, a kind of form of private money. I wasn't at that meeting, but I've spoken to someone who was at the meeting, and it seems to me that the way it was reported is not totally accurate. I don't think that it's as sure a thing as that it would happen. I'm not saying it won't happen, but I don't think there's that much clarity coming from HMRC to be able to say this, it's going to happen sometime soon. HMRC are engaging with stakeholders. They are inviting people to give information, learn about all aspects of the supply chain for Bitcoin. They're looking at providing some sort of, they're trying to find information about how they might provide some kind of tax regime for all taxes, not just VAT. So it would look at VAT, but also the other kinds of taxes, income tax, capital gains tax, stuff like that. I'm hopeful that they will get this information and then act on it and provide some kind of tax advice that we can rely on. The HMRC can give guidance, but that guidance can be overruled. So once we have that, you'll be right to follow it. But again, there's no guarantee that a court might overrule it or some other factor would take precedence over the guidance that is given. And just going back to the point about the FCA, as a lawyer, and I'm trying to give people the regulatory advice, it's frustrating that there's so little. The technology's running on, the businesses they're all developing, people are making serious money and they're making big advancements in the way they do business, but the FCA is not doing anything. So I would like to suggest that if you are starting a business or if you have a business, or you're thinking about it, contact the FCA and just try and demonstrate to them that people want to know what to do. People want to do Bitcoin, they want to operate a Bitcoin business, they want to make sure they're not going to get in trouble, and it would be good to at least kind of cajole the FCA into saying something which might be picked up by more mainstream media and then apply more pressure. So I guess it's a kind of decentralized lobbying. So I would ask you all to have a go at that. I'll leave it to the other guys now. Thank you.
Thanks, Eitan. Can you hear me at the back? Okay, I'm Sian Jones. I am not a lawyer, I'm not an accountant. I do specialize in regulation and compliance matters, specifically focusing on the cryptocurrency space. Most of my time is spent advising companies on their best fit jurisdictions, taking into account privacy, regulation, and taxation requirements. I think we need to understand, first of all, what this thing, regulation, is, because I often hear people talk about, is Bitcoin regulated, or it isn't regulated, which is the case. We have to understand just a little bit about what regulation is. First of all, regulation exists out of public policy, so typically out of legislation, or in some jurisdictions out of diktat. It, generally speaking, applies to activities that are undertaken by you, me, others, and one thing like death and taxes, it's a certainty, certainly in anything that has to do with financial services, and I don't think we can get away from the notion that Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies are anything other than a financial service, even if there isn't a pigeonhole for it yet. Bear in mind, regulators have just one job, and that's to regulate. Let's just drill that down one step further. What are the areas of regulation? Well, something we're probably not too fussed about today is macroeconomic policy, things like money supply, interest rates, and all that lovely stuff. Really, it's not anything that we can do anything about. Governments like to regulate that stuff because they think that's their job. Of course, Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies don't fit that model and probably can't be regulated at any kind of macro level. It gives rise to some jurisdictions wanting to, feeling uncomfortable that they're losing control of something, and so they go to their default position. And the default position in regulation can be affected by cultural factors, political factors, those sorts of things, which are either one of two things: either everything's forbidden that isn't expressly allowed, or everything's allowed that isn't expressly forbidden. A little bit more down to earth, we've got regulation of capital and exchange controls in some jurisdictions. Let's take India, which is a very big market, very big for cryptocurrencies potentially. There are exchange controls, the capital controls, and there are obvious implications with cryptocurrencies in converting fiat currencies which are controlled into cryptocurrencies that are not controlled, and can therefore facilitate the flight of capital and can have economic impact. There's regulation for market integrity to keep markets stable. There's regulation for consumer protection so you don't lose your money. Even the most libertarian anarcho-capitalist still wants to make sure that his money or her money isn't stolen or lost or scammed or disappears. That's why there are people camped outside Mt. Gox at the moment. There's something which has really only emerged in the last few years, and that's regulation affecting money laundering, using controls over money and the people who have money and move money, and knowing where it's going in order to avoid it being laundered or going towards terror financing. And although it strictly speaking isn't regulation, there's taxation as well, which it kind of is. At Coinscrum, we identified the relevant authorities and in something like about 50-odd jurisdictions. We monitor the rights that citizens have to buy, sell, mine, own, use cryptocurrencies. We monitor the taxation treatment in those jurisdictions for when cryptocurrencies are being exchanged, when they're being mined, or just used in everyday commerce. And we monitor any registration requirements for exchanges, for money and payment services, for e-money, and anti-money laundering. So we've got a pretty good handle on what's going on around the world, and we're tapped into all the developments. Now, this month alone, we've been hit pretty much daily with some news or other about regulation. You can see the list of countries. I'm not going to read them off, but that's just since the beginning of this month. I've kind of color-coded them so that you can get a feel. I'm sorry, the yellow and the green don't really contrast very well up here, but the vast majority are actually quite neutral. Statements about, or pronouncements about how current regulatory frameworks are viewed in relation to Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies. They're very much sitting on the fence. There isn't very much in the way of new stuff, stuff that's been created specifically for Bitcoin. And since Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies don't fit any existing pigeonholes very well, it's all about interpretation and trying to see how things fit. This swathe of sort of announcements that have come out this month, last month, month before, really in reaction to things that happened last year. These are not something new. These have just been working through the regulators' systems, and in light of big price fluctuations and larger interest globally, we have got a string of central banks and other regulators pronouncing where they think it fits today in their system. Most of these are yellow. Sitting on the fence, there are some problems. I'll illustrate one of those in a moment. There is some good news stories in there. The green one, two green ones in there, or should be one green one really, I suppose, is California. That's a very positive outcome. Of itself isn't major, but on the other hand, it's indicative of something very important happening. And one piece of really bad news, and that's in Russia, where effectively they've banned, or they've interpreted that Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies are illegal. And China is supposed to be orange up there because the news out of China, which got a lot more attention than California, actually wasn't that bad. There were some very good parts to it. So let me just take you through a few of those. Let's look at China. The news out of China was that banks and payment institutions are prohibited from dealing in Bitcoin, or handling Bitcoin, or being involved in the exchange between fiat currencies and cryptocurrencies. That was to become effective on the 31st of January, and in the lead up to that deadline, one of the largest exchanges, BTC China, suspended their operations. When they started to study the pronouncement in more detail, they realized that actually it wasn't a bad news at all. It just meant that the exchange mechanism between fiat and cryptocurrencies, the on and off ramps for them, had been constrained. But there were other ways. And indeed, the news story, the good news story out of China was that actually the authorities endorsed the use of Bitcoin amongst its citizens. They had no problem with Chinese citizens buying, selling, using, holding Bitcoin. Just not channeling it through the banks or payment institutions. I think there is one caveat with China, as indeed all of Asia Pacific and perhaps elsewhere. The rules can change very quickly and are almost on a whim. The pronouncement that came out prohibiting banks and payment institutions from handling Bitcoin transfers came very much out of the blue. It was not particularly expected, and that can change very quickly. There aren't the democratic processes and the consultation that we're used to here. Now, if we look at Russia, the bad news story, I'm afraid the central bank in the Russian Federation looked up the law, and it says that their interpretation is that the only legal currency in the Russian Federation is the ruble issued by the government. That's it, full stop. Therefore, any other currency or representation of currency is illegal. It's unlawful. I think a lot of Russian businesses are struggling to work out what that really means for them, but it was a pretty clear pronouncement. It came from the central bank, it came from the prosecutor's office, and it came from two other law enforcement agencies, including the what are they called now? The FSB, which is the KGB as was. Thank you. Yes. I should know that. I lived through that time. Anyway, it's all down there, they say, in Article 27 of the federal law. Only government-issued rubles. So we move now to California. This is really a very good news story that I don't think has had enough publicity. Yes, it's only one state. America's made up of 50-odd states. They all have their own legislature. They all pass their own laws, and they're quite separate from federal law. There really isn't a reason why one state should sort of pop its head above the parapet, but California has, and it's made cryptocurrencies expressly allowed. It's endorsed it. It's actually in the words. There's a piece of legislation that passed through last month, the lower house, the assembly, state assembly, called lawful money. It's a bill AB 129, lawful money alternative currency. That is its title. And it passed very quickly in 1 month through the lower house. It passed the final reading 75 votes to nil. 75 votes to nil. Not one vote against. It's now this month moved forward to the state senate, and it's about a week ago, I think it was on the 14th, passed on to a finance committee of the Senate. There seems to be the will, okay, yes, Silicon Valley's in California. There seems to be the will to make things move and move quickly. It sets a significant precedent within America because it's the first and only piece of legislation that actually specifically permits currency other than the dollar. It acknowledges a whole range of currencies, incidentally, quite a few community currencies in there as well. But and the accompanying document that went round the assembly goes into some specific detail about Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies. But it actually clarifies changes to the current law to ensure that various forms of alternative currency, such as digital currency, blah, 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 do not violate the law when those methods are used for the purchase of goods and services or the transmission of payments. Very specific, very clear, and very good news. And so to the last country I want to just pick on today, out of this month's news, Israel. Now, I've kind of signalled this green. It is good news because it's indicative of a lot of those yellow sitting on the fence. Well, you know, kind of, it isn't legal tender anywhere. We don't recognise it, blah, blah, blah. I'll go into those in a few minutes. But It is done with great clarity, and it is done more effectively than any other jurisdiction. And as always, one should look at the nuances behind it. There has been some publicity in the press that there was the threat that they might regulate certain aspects of it, but actually if you read the fine print, there isn't, not any more than anything else might one day be regulated or not regulated, or the law changed. Here are some specific quotes that I've taken from the 3-page or 4-page notice that was issued. Bear in mind the title. It was a notice to the public regarding possible risks in decentralized virtual currencies such as Bitcoin. Great news, because Bitcoin is mentioned specifically. A lot of jurisdictions use very woolly wording. Okay, it clarifies that it's not the legal tender of any country. Well, that's the fact. It's not legal tender in any country. And I doubt for some time that it will be legal tender. Legal tender is the stuff which you're required by law in any given jurisdiction to accept in exchange as payment for goods or services, or in some cases debt. It does vary. It describes virtual currencies as high risk in terms of money laundering and terror financing. Well, the reality is it is. It's no different than cash, but it is high risk. And it's in a section that's actually directed at financial institutions, banks, and so forth, to make sure that they focus on the higher level of risk that might be associated with on and off ramps. It's no more, no less than that, and it's perfectly accurate. It talks about unique characteristics of virtual currencies being liable to present fertile ground for fraudulent activities. Well, they've already happened. There was the Bitcoin Bank scam in America. There are one or two others that have hit the news. Yeah, it's true, but then that applies to a lot of other unregulated financial services. It describes the value of virtual currencies being highly volatile. Well, we've all seen that over the last year or so. There's nothing new there. Highly accurate. It does warn that law enforcement authorities are likely to close trading platforms which are used for illegitimate activities. That's certainly something which applies anywhere in the world. Let's look at Charlie Shrem recently. Let's look at Silk Road. Let's look at pretty much anywhere in the world. It doesn't just apply to Bitcoin. If something illegal is going on, they're going to get you. My last slide. It warns the public that forgotten passwords are liable to lead to the absolute loss of value stored on the computer or the phone. Well, that's for sure. We've read the stories. Trading exchanges have ceased their operations. Some of them, it describes some that have ceased their operations due to a breach by a third party, and the value of the virtual currency held there disappeared. Well, that certainly happened, and may be happening right now in Japan. It warns that the trade in virtual currencies is not supervised by any government authority. Well, that's for sure. So in other words, watch out. And the takeaway from it is that the Bank of Israel and the various other bodies that got together to issue this, which I think is also significant, it was a bringing together of all relevant financial services authorities to issue this joint statement. And basically they recommend to members of the public considering the use of decentralized virtual currencies to understand their characteristics, to be aware of the unique risks inherent in their use, and to display heightened awareness and caution. That's all it says. A very practical advice, very useful advice. We're going to see a lot more of this kind of stuff coming out over the next few months. I don't think there are any jurisdictions that are any time soon going to come up with anything significant, but most jurisdictions are working on it right now. I'm Sean Jones. There's my email address if you want to get in touch with me.
Thanks, Sean. How do I just keep flipping? Right up, sir. Sorry. Hi, I'm Adam Vaziri from Diacle. We're regulation consultants, primarily in financial services, electronic money, payment institutions, and funds. Oh, which one? Which button?
Down on the side as well.
Okay. So I'm not going to cover any of the ground that has already been touched upon as to what Bitcoin is and the status in terms of the countries and how they perceive Bitcoin. But I'm just going to emphasize a few new developments around the Bitcoin space, such as Ethereum, which I'll have an interesting discussion, hopefully, with Stefan afterwards. So there are some amazing developments coming out, such as Ethereum. But in a virtual world, the real laws still apply. Okay, and we shouldn't forget that. And when we talk about money laundering, as was mentioned before, those laws still apply to Bitcoin business laws, as you are all probably very well aware. But let's look at some of the new regulatory business models that may be popping up over the next 12 to 18 months. Right, so the first thing is, this is a bit speculative, however. The payment systems regulator. So for the first time ever in the UK, we have now the FCA, as of April, well, as of this year sometime, they are going to regulate payment systems. And now I'm not talking about a payment institution that enables and facilitates transaction. I'm talking about the system itself that's behind it. So chaps, backs, and 3-4 party schemes. So a 3-party scheme is where you have a card holder, an issuer, acquirer, and a merchant. So that 3-party process that enables any card transaction, that process is now going to fall within the remit of the FCA. The idea behind that was to increase competition, because obviously if you don't have access to the networks, the card associations, for example, if you're a bank, then you cannot compete with other banks. So I'm looking at it from the point of view as if we are moving towards regulating the infrastructure for payments, then will the FCA turn to the blockchain and say, well, is this going to be a payment system that we need to bring within our remit? Now, don't worry about it, guys. I really don't think that's a priority for them at the moment. But it's just something to bear in mind. Okay, interesting. Okay, Ripple. I'm not sure how well aware everyone is about this, but if you have a decentralized currency, Ripple could be, if you want, a federated currency. It's federated because rather than having individuals who are participating in the mining, there is no such thing as really mining. You have gateways rather than exchanges. The gateways effectively operate like exchanges. So you go to the gateway and you buy your XRBs or whatever, but XRPs. But the that was quite dramatic. That's the vibrations. I created a ripple. Yeah.
It's Ripple.
So,
you're talking about Ripple.
That's the ripple. That's the ripple. Anything else that's going to fall apart? Anyone want to fall off their seat? No problem. Okay, but XRP is not really a currency per se. It lacks characteristics such as fungibility. It's primarily used as an authentication token for a transaction, primarily. Now, this is an interesting point because inherently in Ripple, unlike Bitcoin, you are not, if you weren't transferring a currency, you are transferring credit to another person. So it's like an IOU system. And credit in the UK is regulated. If I'm providing credit to someone, then I'm regulated to do so. But you're only regulated to do so if you're doing it for business purposes under the Consumer Credit Act. So you don't have to worry about that at the moment. Interestingly, FCA is going to be regulating peer-to-peer lending platforms. So this is a new wave of regulation that's bringing in crowdfunding, etc., starting from April. So peer-to-peer lending platforms will be regulated from April. So the Ripple system, if you look at it, take it a step back, could be perceived to be a peer-to-peer lending platform. So I wonder whether Ripple Labs are going to obtain a license. And then the last thing is exchanges currently for Bitcoin are fitting within the definition of a payment institution. So in various countries around the world, they're applying for licenses in that capacity. Question is whether gateways, who essentially perform the same function as exchanges, are also going to be looking for payment institution licenses. Nadav, wake up. I can see. Right, okay, another new awesome development is third-party guarantors. Now, this is very interesting. I don't know if you heard about reality keys. So, Bitcoin deposited into a wallet, then a verifiable event occurs, and the funds are released to one of the two addresses that have the correct prediction. So essentially, you put it into some form of escrow, an event occurs, and the third party controlling the escrow releases the funds to one of the two parties. Now, this is a new innovation through reality keys in terms of a service. They're applying it to currencies and betting. Now, this is an interesting point, because betting, operating an intermediary betting exchange in the UK requires a license. Section 13 of the Gambling Act. Now, let's just give you the example. If I agree with this gentleman here, okay, that tomorrow the weather is going to be full of sun, okay, we agree that we set up an escrow, put the money in that account, and then the escrow manager delivers that to him because it is sunny tomorrow, and he bets that it's going to be sunny. This process is a betting exchange and requires a license in the UK. So these are points to bear in mind. This is not, I'm not here to scare you all off innovating. Please innovate. But bear in mind there are laws that exist that would apply if the regulators knew what a reality keys were. Okay, so yeah, and another point is an event is verifiable. So it's going to be sunny tomorrow. You look outside, it's sunny, yes, but people will always dispute events. You know, referees, results, yes, objective events, but they will, to some extent, require an arbitrator, which would be the intermediary. And that's partly one of the reasons why betting exchanges are regulated, because of this arbitration aspect. Ethereum. So, as I'm not going to tell you what Ethereum is or Mastercoin, you already know, but the process of a decentralized exchange for financial derivatives is an absolutely phenomenal concept in terms of the implications. You're packaging contracts and transactions, but I want everyone to remember that Section 19 of FISMA, okay, strict prohibition with regards to the conduct of regulated activities. If you are carrying out regulated activity in the UK by way of business, then you need authorization. And to not obtain authorization and to be trading derivatives through Ethereum, or any other exchange would constitute a criminal offense. And that's something to bear in mind. And more importantly, on legal terms, would render that agreement that you entered into unenforceable. So these are points to bear in mind. As we continue to innovate within this area, we need to bear in mind that there's an existing legal framework that we need to fit within. Obviously, we're going to adapt that framework to suit our own interests, like we're trying to do with HMRC, but there is a framework there. And if regulators start to understand this technology and where it's going, then we need to be there to lobby, to tell them, look, this is what we're doing. We're ready to obtain a license from you at any stage. We know that the regulation applies to us. We're willing to apply for a betting exchange license, you know. But then the Gambling Commission will say, well, what the hell is Bitcoin? Fine, just get the letter from them confirming that, and you're safe. That's it. Thank you, guys.
Do you see Bitcoin in the near future being regulated the way in which money service providers were sort of like in and around 2005, 2006?
Eventually, I think that will happen. I think eventually we'll see something along the lines of what you have in the US from FinCEN in March of last year. I think so.
Yeah, definitely.
What do you guys classify a Bitcoin ATM as? Would you consider that an exchange? And what regs do you think all the Bitcoin ATMs are going to go through as they come to London?
I think that's a good question. I think there's different ways of using the ATMs. I do think it ultimately is a kind of exchange. Some of the ATMs don't have built into them. I think the Lamasu one doesn't. Please correct me if I'm wrong. But it doesn't have any KYC built into it, whereas RoboCoin does. So I think that if you're operating a Lamasu and your job is to keep it full of Bitcoin and whatnot, you need to make sure that you are in some way complying with KYC obligations. There aren't any KYC obligations, strictly speaking, in the UK right now, but it's something which, to me, I think is a no-brainer. I think I think if you're going to be exchanging money, then you should definitely be taking ID. I don't think operating on a master machine makes it that easy to do, whereas RoboCoin, it is easy to do. So to answer your question, I think it's a kind of exchange, and whatever it is, if you're operating one, you should watch out for the KYC.
I completely endorse what Eitan said, but I would also add, it's not just KYC. When anti-money laundering regulations hit cryptocurrencies, as almost certainly they will, I think we've probably all agreed on that at the top here, then you've got obligations that will go beyond just capturing ID. There will have to be some active risk management of the transactions. Now that's going to be quite hard to do through a vending machine or ATM.
I was just wondering, when we're told by governments that they consider Bitcoin to be private money, is that a good thing or a bad thing? Should I be worried? Because I think people generally consider it private money.
There's a nice pigeonhole for Bitcoin in Germany that stems from the existence and recognition in law of regional currencies. So think Brixton pounds over here, but we have no formal recognition of such currencies here. There is no such thing in English law that I'm aware of for private currencies. I tend to agree with Eitan that's probably misreporting that's been going on there. It's more likely that in this country, Bitcoin, if we're thinking, for example, here, VAT, which is possibly what's going through your mind, then it's more likely that cryptocurrencies will be deemed not to be goods or services and therefore not subject of themselves to VAT. I think that's the general gist of the way that the thinking is going. The fact that some countries have such things as private currencies. In fact, the California legislation does acknowledge already existing equivalents of things like the Brixton pound. They've got in California alone about a couple of dozen such things. So I think the private money things are a red herring.
I'd like to add to that, because the limitation of recognising it as private money means not recognising it as currency. If it is recognised as currency, then if you weren't, from a regulatory standpoint, all of the business models in, if you weren't the ecosphere of Bitcoin will suddenly emerge. So people creating derivatives based on currency would need to obtain authorization from the FCA. But if it's recognised as private money, and not a commodity or a currency, then it's more difficult, say, to regulate derivatives that are based on that. At least they don't fit within FSMA in the same way. And another point is currency, if you want banks, etc., they're providing brokerage services, the services that they provide, they do not add VAT to it because as it's a financial service and currency, it is exempt from VAT. However, I'm not sure whether the same will apply if it's recognised as private money. I'm sure HMRC will be wanting to get some money out of the exchanges in terms of their commission if they categorise it private money. Would you agree about? I'm not sure.
I think there's a capital gains implication though. I think for private money, certainly in Germany, there's an implication that it's a capital gains implication. So if you hold on to it for a certain amount of time and then cash back into fiat, then you have to pay capital gains on the increased value you've achieved by from the exchange trading, basically. The profit from the exchange trading is a capital gain.
The capital gains issue is probably no different than any other instrument or currency if you hold it. About the only exemption in Germany that I'm aware of is if you exchange foreign currency for personal use on a trip abroad. Other than that, if you speculatively bought, a whole, well, if you're in Germany, you might buy a load of pound sterling with a view to a capital gain, depending on how long you held it and so on and so forth. It would be subject to the same normal rules.
Right. You were talking about earlier regulation and the job of the regulators being amongst which, macroeconomic policy, market integrity, and consumer protection. So again, it's a similar question to what I was asking to Stefan earlier. Complementary currencies like the beer in Switzerland have demonstrated for many years now that as far as macroeconomy is concerned, having a complementary currency is actually a very good stabilizer for the economy. As far as market integrity is concerned, if you look at the LIBOR scandal where people were fixing rates because they were doing it all behind closed doors, if you were to use a blockchain system where all the trades of the banks in terms of borrowing and lending were marked on the blockchain, there would be no cheating possible, right? Now, in terms of of consumer protection, when you use a trustless system, once again, you can have much more consumer protection than with the existing system. Are the regulators even aware of such potentials, in your opinion?
That's a very good question, Hakeem. In some jurisdictions, yes, they're very aware. There are some very clued up people in some regulators. I'm thinking particularly of the Bank of England, for example. There are people there who are very switched on and very aware. Who clearly understand cryptocurrencies and how they might impact on other things. I don't think that the argument for market stability sort of melts away completely with the blockchain. Market stability, I'm sorry, I've mentioned them already twice today, but a certain Japanese firm
having a complementary currency. What I mean by that is, if there is an issue on the national currency, if you have a bunch of complementary currency that are allowed in your economy, then it allows the people around society to be able to continue to trade and sell their services and goods, even though their local currency may be suffering high inflation or whatever problems they may be suffering. So that's what I'm talking about when I'm talking about market stability as a stabilizer of the economy as a whole.
No, I have no particular view on the political question.
Okay, so we're going to take one more question from the back, sorry, and then we're going to break for please.
Hi, there's a lot of people who want to set up Bitcoin companies, and they want to go through the legal route and the regulation route. One massive problem is how to set up a bank account that has a Bitcoin system. What's your advice or your comments surrounding getting and trading access to Bitcoin business with or without UK banks?
It's possible to operate a Bitcoin business without a bank account if you're only taking payment in Bitcoin, the null point of Bitcoin, or if it has a point. Bitbargain, for example, don't operate a bank account and they don't need one for their particular business model. So depending on how you manage your business, you may not need one. If you want one and what you're planning to do requires one, then first of all, good luck, because in the UK it's really hard to get banking. I think it's not actually proven to be possible, really. Not for a pure Bitcoin business. There are other banks outside of the UK which you could bank with. I think that even some of those who have previously been named as being good banks to go for, to apply for, I think they've now been shown to be a little bit sketchy about it. We saw Deutsche Bank closing accounts and things like that in the last few months. It's always going to come down to your particular business model. If you end up with a foreign bank, you're going to find that the UK market is going to expect to input a sort code and an account number. And if you ask them for IBAN and all the rest of that with the fees and whatnot, it makes things feel a bit alien. If you try and buy a Bitstamp, it's not easy to do because you can't just use your usual internet banking. So again, for me, that's why the regulation is so important, is because that will make the banks less fearful. I don't think it's any kind of conspiracy on the part of the banks to try and stifle this. I think they have so much power already that this is really just I think by their standards, it's a very small industry, very small economy. But I do think that they're very fearful of getting a £500 million fine for money laundering, and they're just paranoid about all that kind of stuff, and they refuse on that basis.
Didn't stop them to launder $480 billion of drugs money.
Since they got caught,
and this is just the first bank. There's 5 other ones in the US.
I'm just going to ask the follow-up from Mount Fox's fallout. Do you think we're going to see a sort of Japan come out with an opinion that is then going to have all the regulators around the world come with sort of...
It's always been strange, they've never come out with an opinion, and they've got to exist from day one.
But now that people are protesting outside their offices and it's come home and there's international media, usually what you have is, if the international media come, then Japan makes a response, otherwise it's...
Well, I just always thought their silence has been kind of right telling anyway all along, but I don't...
I mean, has there been any indications of any news out of Japan's regulator or any...
No, at the moment not, and I don't think it's likely.
I think
not for a short term.
I think your point ties in a bit with Keith's point, and it's a consumer protection thing. If you run a business like that, personal view, they're running that business horribly, the communication's terrible, no one knows what's going on, and it's a consumer protection point. Same thing as a wallet that's too difficult to use and makes everyone accidentally delete their Bitcoin, upgrade,